Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the funeral service. We ask for those that have a cell phone or pager if you could turn it to the silent mode. Officiating is Rabbi Leonard Mentenke.
אשרי האיש אשר לא הלך בעצת רשעים ובדרך חטאים לא עמד, ובמושב לצים לא ישב, כי אם בתורת אדוני חפצו, ותורתו יגע יומם ולילה. והיה כעץ שתול על פלגי מים, אשר פריו ייתן בעתו, ועלהו לא ייבול, וכל אשר יעשה יצליח. לא כן הרשעים, כי אם כמוץ אשר תדפנו רוח, על כן לא יקומו רשעים במשפט, וחטאים בעדת צדיקים. כי יודע אדוני דרך צדיקים ודרך רשעים תאבד. מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר, בנודה שירביצני על מי מנוחות ינהלני. נפשי ישובב ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא ירא כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. דשנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה, אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. This evening, we have gathered to remember a very special man, a cherished husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, a distinguished balabos, and a dear friend to so many. This evening we've gathered to remember Yaakov Elchanan ben Moshe Yehuda Frankenthal of blessed memory. And while we'll soon hear Divrei Hesped from four of his sons, from Tzvi, Hillel, Rabbi Nathanael, and Itamar, before I call on them, I want to share just two brief thoughts based on a well-known phrase found in this week's parashah, the words Banim atem laHashem Elokechem. You're the children of Hashem, your God. What does it mean to be children of Hashem? According to the Ramban, it and the mitzvah that follows teaches us that Klal Yisrael bears a measure of Kedusha, a sanctity that's derived from our filial relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, K'mo HaKohanim, a Kedusha similar to the sanctity of Kohanim, to which one of the Balei HaTosfot, Yosef Bechor Shor, added that due to this relationship, we should never feel completely alone, even after the passing of a loved one, which, explained Rabbi Yehuda Leib Ginsburg, is the reason that Kaddish recited by an Ovel speaks not of the deceased, but of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our parent, eternal. 2 months ago, I visited Reb Elchanan in the hospital. He was visibly weak, but we spoke not of illness, but of Torah, sharing stories of the places we had studied, the people we had met, and of course the things we had learned along the way. In so many ways, and despite the setting, it was like so many conversations we had had in the past, because whenever we spoke, it was always with words of Torah and the warmth and the genuineness that was who he was, a man who was the epitome of a child of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a man who was a Talmid Chacham and had learned from some of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim, a person who cherished Torah and was a Yodea Sefer, a friend whose smile and humor were infectious, and an accomplished businessman who, together with his Ezer Kinegdo, Zulangar Yor Annette, created a family of renown. His was a life that embodied the Ramban's understanding of Banim atem laHashem Elokechem. And tonight, as his family and our community mourn his loss, seek to understand why a man so young, so filled with life could have been taken so soon, the only words of consolation I can offer are the words of Banim Atem LaHashem Elokechem, words that assure us that because of the relationship that he forged with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our parent eternal, will grant them a measure of nechama, knowing that their husband, father, and grandfather accomplished so much, helped so many, made a difference in communities in Israel and the East Coast and here in Chicago, and that he lived a life tachat kanfei hashchina, surrounded by the faith and the trust and the protection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that he shared that relationship, that protection with you. On behalf of everyone present, I ask Mechila from Rabbi Yaakov Elchanan ben Moshe Yehuda for anything we should have done but didn't, shouldn't have done but did. His was a life that inspired so many, a life filled with brightness and hope, a life shared with so many, and a life guided by a deep and enduring faith. To his wife, Annette, to his children, Tzvi and Ora, Hillel and Shifra, Nathanael and Shendi, Tamar and Hadassah, and Tsuriel, to all of them, our hearts go out to you this evening. May he be a good debater for all of you and for all of us, and may his memory be for an eternal blessing. Bila hamavet lanetzach u'mocha Hashem Elokim dimami al kol panim tehi nishmato tzura b'tzura chayim. And now we'll be hearing from Tzvi, and then Hillel, who will be online, Rabbi Nathanael and Itamar.
I'd like to first thank you all for coming or Zooming in at such a late hour in the middle of the week. We made this late since we were waiting for family members to get in from Eretz Yisrael, and we'll be leaving Eretz Hashem early tomorrow morning to Florida for the Kavura. So thank you for being here. I had the privilege and the honor to spend time with my father over the last 50 years. My father was my teacher, my mentor, my confidant, my friend, and we worked together for so many years. Thank you, Abba, for teaching me both Torah and Chayei Maaseh. Many years ago, when I was in elementary school, I remember asking my father, Abba, what is the purpose of life? And my father answered, La'asok bevinyano shel olam, to be busy with the building of this world, to be part of creation. This is how my father led his life and how he tried to teach us to lead ours. In the last few months, while my father was ill, I had some opportunities to spend time with him. And one of the questions I asked was, Abba, years ago, when I was a child, I had asked you the purpose of life, and this is what you told me, La'asok bevinyano shel olam. Do you still believe this? Or perhaps, is it to enjoy life that God gave us, regardless if one is productive or not? And he answered me unequivocally in his heavy German accent, absolutely. I still believe it. We are here to contribute and build. What is a life that does not contribute and only enjoys? My father, every day, had a small piece of paper where he wrote his tasks for the day. And on top, he started it by writing B'siyata Dishmaya, with God's help. And he added one more word every day. He wrote La'asot, a call of action to be part of God's creation, to create, to do. For my father, the definition of building, creating, and contributing was multifaceted. He cared for people. He could feel their pain and rejoiced in their joy. He often said, "What gives me pleasure when I pull up to work in the morning is seeing a full parking lot, knowing that all these people are supporting their children who are growing, learning, and building the next generation." Employees and colleagues would often give him pictures of their children, and sometimes in subsequent years as he grew up, and he would line them up in his office, since this is what he felt he was helping to build the next generation. My father's motto at work was always, "Nobody works for us, everyone works with us." And he saw the work effort as a joint creation. All of us together are creating. He loved the people that we work with, and I thank those of you from work who are here or joining in on Zoom. He used to tell us as kids, I remember as a little child, if you have nothing to do, don't do it here. My father would often tell us about the pasuk we recently read in Parshas Elchanan. Ushmartem v'asitem ki chochmatchem ubinatchem le'nei amim. You should guard and you should do, since this is the wisdom that you will portray onto the nations. In life, he said, very often we see that ones that focus on guarding the past are not creating new things in the present. And the ones that are creating new things in the present are abandoning the past. The directive that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us is to merge the two, to continue to do, develop, create, while maintaining and guarding our sacred traditions. This was a direction at home. This was a direction at work. Create, do, while guarding the Torah, guarding our values, and respecting all of God's creations. My father got smicha, yore yadin yadin, from Rav Charlap. And he told us, that Rav Charlap told him when he gave him the smicha, "I'm giving you the smicha because I know that you will always respect the halacha and that you understand the essence of the halacha." That is how my father taught us, understand the reasons behind things and don't bend the truth to match what you want or what you do. That's a lishmor, to guard. It's a lishmor v'lasot. Abba didn't just focus on doing and creating. He always marveled at God's creations and other people's creations. Abba used to tell us, "Look what an amazing life we have. We drive cars that have seats that are as comfortable as couches, climate-controlled vents providing us heat in the winter and cold in the summer, all while listening to a symphony from Beethoven." He used to say, "I'm traveling better than the kings and queens of lore who traveled in freezing chariots, covered in blankets, with dirt and squalor on the roads and from the animals that pulled them." Abba would marvel at the weather, telling us, "Look how much energy and thought man has to put into cooling or heating a small space, a refrigerator or a freezer. And look how God, in an instant, can change the weather, heat, freeze, thaw, etc., entire regions." Growing up, I remember as a little kid, we'd be stuck in traffic and other drivers were impatient. And he would often tell us, "I try to look at the world as if I'm behind a hospital window." He would say, "What would an individual in a hospital looking out at the traffic give to be able to be sitting in traffic and partaking in the everyday hustle and creation?" Unfortunately, Abba, you are looking outside of this window these past months, growing weaker and weaker and frustrated that you do not have the energy to create like you do. But you saw your children and grandchildren, and you felt nachas, and felt that Baruch Hashem, you helped continue God's creation. The last 6 months were very difficult for our family, and the way that all of you, Ima, my brothers, my sisters-in-law, dedicated and sacrificed your time, your knowledge, and resources to be there and be part of the struggle was such a source of strength and fortitude for each and every one in the family. I was humbled by the efforts that I saw you putting. You left no stone unturned to find the best treatments for Abba. Almost overnight, you transformed the house into a safe haven to prevent falls. You did everything possible to try to make Abba's position and treatment more comfortable. You guided entire teams of doctors by gently and respectfully sharing your knowledge with them. And you did everything possible to make sure Abba had the most dignity and comfort possible until the last seconds of his life, all with great sacrifice, love, and dedication. Abba and Ima Sheikhya appreciated this. Abba left this world with the greatest comfort, pride, and appreciation to each of you, and I think he felt that he indeed succeeded Lasot, to create. Acharon Chaviv, our dear Ima, I know you hate the spotlight, so I will keep this short, but you were always Abba's rock. You supported Abba through thick and thin over the years. Abba told me so many times, I don't know what I did to be zocheh to get mommy as my wife. I don't feel worthy to have such a great personality as my wife. Abba loved you so much and felt so honored to be your husband. Abba thought the world of you, and so do we, Mommy. Your genuine warmth and care for every human being and the inner strength that you use to support so many is a trait that we all try to emulate. We are all here for you, Ima, in any way that we can be of support. Even during these difficult months, when you tried every type of food that would please Abba's ever-changing palate and give him the nutrients and proteins that he needed to fight his illness and strengthen him, Abba would tell me how much he loved you and how sorry he felt for not being able to eat after all the effort that you put into trying to find something that would soothe his ever-changing palate and build his strength. Abba, very often, I would pass by your house in the early morning or at night to stop and talk about business. I would pull up to your house, and the light from your room was shining to the street. Ner dolek, a lit candle. The last several months, when I pulled up to the house, there was no candle burning. The light did not shine from your room, yet I could tell that your light continues to shine through your children. You've taught me so much. We've been together through so much that I pray that I can continue to carry the torch forward and light it bright, to continue Lishmar v'lasot, to build and to guard as you directed us. I also want to take this opportunity to apologize again and ask Mechila. I did it by your bedside, but I want to apologize again if I was ever disrespectful at work, if I was short, curt, or did not give you the time and attention that you wanted from me. Please forgive me. You often came into my room to tell me how proud you were of my brothers or about Dvar Torah that you were thinking about, and I will miss it. It wasn't only work. Lastly, to my sisters-in-law and my wife, both Abba and Ima always told us how blessed they felt to be zochet, to have such wonderful daughters-in-law and such wonderful machatanim. Your support, selflessness, and sacrifice during these months was unbelievable. Thank you. And now I'd like to call upon my brother, Hillel, who's going to be joining us by Zoom from Florida.
ברשות, אני מורתי. Ima, I know you hate the spotlight, so I'm just going to echo everything that Zvika said. I know I speak on behalf of all of us. And take this opportunity to thank my wife, Shifra, Ori, Shandy, and Hadassah. And in particular, Tamar and Hadassah, who, together with their family, moved their entire life to Chicago. To help Abba in these last few months. You're all incredible. Thank you. Thank you. Can't even convey. Not really sure how I'm supposed to convey a lifetime of such a wonderful father, such a complex and a rich person. Avinu Moreno in just a few minutes. Whenever we went to a long shiur, Abba always told us, make sure you take away a few raisins or pearls. So in these few minutes, I'll try to capture just a few, and we'll call it raisin extracts of who and what we have all of us today. As we were growing up, sometimes folks, pitied us because they thought we had a tough father. They had no idea how wrong they were. We're 5 boys, and Abba is our model of fatherhood. A father that I hope I can live up to as a parent myself. It was clear that for Abba, parenting wasn't something that one did ad hoc. That's true for Ima as well. It wasn't something that one did ad hoc once children came along. It was a life's mission, one of a person's greatest missions in life. A mission that requires thought, planning, purpose, and design. Abba always said, as parents, you need to first give your children unconditional love, and only after that you can place demands from your kids. And Abba gave a lot of love and support. And feedback, sometimes constructive, always with our best interest in mind. Fathers need to be firm, Abba said, not wishy-washy. Your position and values need to be clear, but you need to know how to balance being firm, but not inflexible. And Abba knew how to walk that balance. We knew what Abba wanted. We knew what was important. Even as we planned this Levaya, many questions were clear because we know what Abba would have wanted. Perhaps that's the meaning of what we will say in a few weeks, Rosh Hashanah. רחמנו כרחם אם כבנים, רחמנו כרחם אב על בנים. We ask for that kind of fatherly kindness, the kind that through the kindness, even in judgment, still shows us direction and continues to educate us. That's how Abba and of course Imat Badel Chaim Aruchim managed to build a home we loved coming back to. We felt safe and calm. And not just us, many others felt that way in our home and came to Abba for advice. And when you came to Abba for advice, Abba stopped what he was doing and he listened. He listened actively and intently. Abba always told us, when you give advice, listen carefully to the other person and advise them based on what is best for them. Think of their best interest. Abba's sense of purpose and forethought was pervasive. Abba seemed stern to those who didn't know him, often because being clean-cut and groomed was important to Abba, and he appeared and was very yekish. But that was a facade for a sharp wit and a great sense of humor. Abba said to us many times, being a serious person does not mean that you don't have a sense of humor. And people should not think that just because I'm joking around, that it means that I'm not serious. Even last week, Abba said to us about his own eventual passing. This is the way of life. It will hurt. You will cry. Everyone will cry. Only one person won't be crying, and that's me. And we all laugh, even Abba's doctor. Time for Abba was precious, as was punctuality. I like to arrive early. It means that I have control over time, rather than time have control over me. Abba put in long work days, and when I was in Yeshivat Merkaz Arav, I heard from his friends that this was true also in Yeshiva. A 16-hour workday for Abba meant 16 full hours of work, with intensity and concentration. Like my brother Tzvi said, Abba felt other people's pain. When Abba watched the news about a natural disaster like an earthquake or tsunami, or an economic crisis, Abba heard for those who lost loved ones, or lost their jobs and careers. This was particularly true for Ke'evan Shel Israel, the pain that Am Yisrael feels. Abba heard the hurts of Am Yisrael and felt connected to Ha'am HaShochen B'Tzion. Abba had a deep sense of awe, reverence, and admiration for the Masoret of Am Yisrael and for the tremendous foresight, ingenuity, and vision that Chazal had in their ability to turn Torah Shebe'al Peh into a Torat Chaim that sustained Am Yisrael throughout the generations in the Galut. In that vein, just going to add a slight twist to what my brother Tzvi said. When Rab Charlap Zatzal gave Abba smicha, he told Abba, I know that you will never give a psak halacha or do anything that would hurt Masoret Yisrael and Am Yisrael. Abba spoke a lot about Yirat Shamayim and the tremendous awe and respect he had for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his power, and the beauty he saw that God put into nature. Abba also started reading and collecting Sifrei Kodesh from a young age, and any of you who've been to our home know of Abba's large Sfarim library. For those who visited our home in Monsey, Abba and Ima always felt that the most beautiful wallpaper is books. And Abba's thirst for knowledge in books in all topics, but mostly in Torah and Yahadut, was until the very end. Perhaps it's telling that in the last few months, Abba purchased a few copies of a book called Sefer Otzar Rashi to give to friends. And perhaps in that regard, I should share with you one of the last ideas Abba shared with me a few times in the last few months. There are two figures who are loved by all of Am Yisrael because of their tremendous contribution to each of us. Abba felt that Moshe Rabbeinu and Rashi are two individuals who are loved by all Am Yisrael unequivocally. Abba gave us all this and so much more. And we so wanted to continue drawing from Abba's well of love, parenting, wise counsel, life experience, and Torah for so many years. And we're grateful for all the years that we had. But in particular, Hashem gifted us for the last 11 years since Abba's last battle with cancer. Abba is the doctor in the family. I had the honor of being involved in the last few months in particular, with all the hospitalizations and the doctor's visits. If there's anything I could have done, if there's anything I overlooked to make you more comfortable, to help lengthen your life, if there's any medical decisions I pushed that Khalila shortened your life or caused you suffering, I want to ask for your forgiveness. Mechila. If there's anything else over the years, at any point that I was disrespectful, or that I didn't call often enough, I want to ask for Mechila. I remember as I was learning Sefer Yeshayahu a few years ago, I became so emotional when I was reading out loud some of the beautiful words of poetic nevuah from the Navi Yeshayahu. Abba asked me to stop. Abba said, it's making me, ani mitragesh yoter midai. It's so beautiful that I get too emotional. So it's only fitting, especially given our current times, that I end with a pasuk, but not just with the beginning of the pasuk, the entire pasuk. Bila mavet lanetzach. ומחה אדוני אלוהים דמעה מעל כל פנים, וחרפת עמו יסיר מעל כל הארץ, כי אדוני דיבר. And I'll turn over the mic to my brother, Rav Netanel.
Shlomo HaMelech concludes the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, with Eshet Chayil. He has many descriptions of the Eshet Chayil, Ateret Ba'ala. She is the crown jewel of her husband. Chochmat Nashim Banta Beita. The wisdom of the wife is what builds the home. And I ask my mother's permission, Birshut, my brother Tzvi, Hila, Itamar Tzuri, and Birshut Kal HaKadosh. The pasuk says, it says in King David said, Haloch yelechu v'cho. He walks as he weeps. And my father would often tell us that in life, you find yourself sometimes walking and weeping. Well, my father said, don't forget to keep walking even if you're weeping. And now's not the time to keep walking. Now's the time that we stop. And in the few short words that I'm going to say, I can't encompass a figure who, 50 years after he left Merkaz Harav, HaKotel, people still remember him, but I will try to be accurate in what I say. Abba was born a year after the founding of the state, and he had a strong desire for Torah from a young age. And this was expressed in the purchase of Sfarim and books, that our house was covered with tens of thousands of books. And it was interesting to me that in the last few months, when I raised new topics, Abba would walk to the bookshelf and show me, here's a book that discusses what you're talking about. Abba had a relationship not only with the books, but also with the authors. The Rav of Tenuva, Rav Wittman, wanted to see Abba when Abba came to Israel. The poskim in Belz, Rav Eichenstein, Rav Metenki, Yibadel Chaim Tovim, and Rav David Feinstein. Abba developed a connection. Rav Yecheskel Abramsky, Rav Provarsky, and Abba was sitting Shiva for his own father, so Rav Provarsky from Ponevezh came to visit him. Rav Nevinsal, Rav Adari. Throughout Abba's life, Abba maintained a connection to Torah. And Abba had a lot of life's wisdom as well. Abba had quotes that he invented that helped people. And being that part of the point of a hesped is that we cherish, we recognize that we lost something precious. But part of the point of the hesped is also, Chazal say, just as a bow shoots an arrow up to the sky, so too a hesped propels the soul forward, because the people listening walk away with wisdom, walk away different people. So I want to share with you some of the quotes that my father used to say. One quote that moved people, he'd say, you should merit to have nachat of yourself. People often think I should have nachat from my children, I should feel satisfaction with other accomplishments. He'd say, you should feel satisfaction with your accomplishments. He would say, we are all our parents' survivors. Every person could look at the home they grew up in and say, well, if you knew where I grew up. And then he'd continue and say, but that doesn't excuse you from being a mensch. He'd say, a lot of evil is rooted in stupidity. Be careful of stupid people. He'd say, the wife of Lot teaches us that when you see tragedy, you have to keep going and you can't just look back. When Lot's wife looked back at the destruction she left, she could not move forward. She became Netziv, standing, Melach, bitterment. He said, in life you have to know sometimes to put on blinders and move forward. He said, mourning comes in waves. Sometimes you feel it, and sometimes you don't, and sometimes it's overpowering. That's normal. That's part of life. He used to tell us a chazan, when you're in shul, can uplift you for a minute. If he connected you for that moment to prayer, to your Creator, he did his job, because you're never going to have a full-time praying connected. It's interesting that I once commented that someone was making funny faces as they were davening. My father said to me, you have no right to look at other people when they're davening. Davening is a person's private speech. It's unfortunate he has to do it in your presence, but you have no right to look. My father used to tell me, for about a decade I was vegetarian, and he said to me, if you don't eat the meat of those who walk on 4, you'll end up eating the meat of those who walk on 2. A person has an innate cruelty that is expressed in consumption of meat, and if you don't give yourself that expression, you can find yourself far more cruel. My father used to tell me, Kol hagadol mechavero yitzro gadol imenu, when our sages said the greater a person is, the greater their desire is for things that are inappropriate, and then he would add, but don't think that because you have a big yetzer, you're a big person. My father would say, if you're, the smarter you are, the further you should be from being crass. Wisdom is supposed to develop a refined person. When Corona happened, my father said to me over and over again, the world thought they controlled the world. Blockchain, computers, who needs God? So God taught us with something minuscule that he's still in control. When my father heard people making jokes about married life, He used to tell me, it is so sacred and so wrong. People who joke about marriage are playing with fire. And when I hear it, I'm furious. They lack sensitivity, but I don't say anything. Ur'ei betuv Yerushalayim. My father would tell us, you should know that you have a choice whether you'll see the good in Jerusalem or not. The pasuk reveals to you, you should see the good in Jerusalem. And I'll end with one quote that my father would often say. David HaMelech, we say in Hallel, David HaMelech said, Ani amarti v'chofzi. When I was in haste, when I was on the run, I said, Kol ha'adam kozev. Everyone's a liar. So my father warned us, he said, you'll have moments in life when you'll look at the world and say, everyone's a liar. But remind yourself you're in haste. That's not life. As much as these quotes show wisdom, my father did not hold of himself. One of the greatest praises a Chazal say of a person is, Lo nakit tuvuta lenafshei. He didn't hold himself in high regard. Even though my father accomplished many dapim of Gemara, we would see my father go through volumes on a Rosh Hashanah, on a Yom Kippur, on a Sukkot, conquering volumes of learning. He didn't hold himself. He would conquer many, many Mishnayos when someone needed to give out Mishnayos Lili Nishmas. My father had a nice voice. He didn't consider himself a chazan. Those who heard him when he was during his year of mourning knew that he had nusach, knew that he could really be a good chazan. But no. If you'd ask my father if he was a Baal Chesed, he'd say no, even though he was very busy with Chesed, with his money, with his time, with his home, with his wisdom. There were orphans that grew up in our home. There were women who came when they needed a place to recover. There were families that received packages, and there were organizations that received donations and packages. And Abba would say, I'm not fit for honor. How many people did Abba tell us, I'm not worthy to stand next to them? They're holy people. How many people did Abba say, I can't stand in their Dalet Amos? I can tell you that as we're here today, there are hundreds of children who learn under the organization Dodi Li. And the first donor to Dodi Li, the Nachshon ben Aminadav, was my father. Corona had started. There was a need for children's education. And when other people were concerned where their funds would go, Abba donated and saw to it that this organization moved forward. One of Abba's hallmarks was Kvod HaBriot. Part of Abba's vision in life was Chaviva Adam Shnivra B'Tselem. All of humanity is created in God's form, and that's how Hashem treated other people. Rabbi Abramson, I appreciated that you made it tonight. Rabbi Abramson once said to me, your parents see appreciation for every person. I know that the gardener who comes and they pay him and he's done a good job, I'm sure that they have tremendous akar satov to him. That's the type of people they are, and he's right. My father gave honor to every man in the mere fact that he was a human being. It didn't matter his color, his beliefs, his age. Even with his own nephews, when my father would visit us, he refused to kiss them. He'd say, they haven't seen me in years. Let them come close, and when they'll feel comfortable, they'll hug me. But I won't hug them until they're comfortable. That honor, that respect, maybe he's not yet comfortable receiving a kiss from me. Respecting his fellow man. With regards to the staff at the factory, staff had the potential to move forward because my father was not concerned whether a person had a college degree or not. My father saw the human being and his potential, and that's why by my father, people moved forward to places they never imagined. My father's sense of humor, anyone who knows him knows his sense of humor. One example was given, someone once said to my father, Yeshakach, you didn't ruin the chinuch your wife built. And my father right away answered him, thank you. That also requires wisdom. There was a lot of love in my father's humor. It could be the gabbai in shul, it could be friends in shul, it could be the Jew, Eliad Aaron, who bought him lulavim. My father invested time in his humor. My father also taught people through his humor. We had a person in our shul that my father once stopped on the street and said, why are you growing a beard? Are you an Avel? So the guy said, no, God forbid. So my father said, then why? So he said, oh, it's Sfira. So my father said, so? So the guy stopped and thought and suddenly realized that Sfira is a form of mourning. And for years afterwards, every time the Sfira would come, he'd remind me that my father pointed out to him that, yes, it's a form of Avelus. My father had a lot of hakarat hatov. Part of the greatness of a person is being able to recognize what others contribute to their lives. And first and foremost, to our mother, my father would often said, I don't know what I merited to have your mother. So special. Whoever meets her knows it. Your mother is a good soul. Your mother takes such good care of me. And my father would cry sometimes, saying how hard my mother worked. To my father's own children, my father had hakarat hatov, and certainly to his daughters-in-law, for their investment in the grandchildren and for their investment in building the relationship with their grandparents. My father would often look to heaven and say, Ribbon Shalom, help me. And then when he'd find a solution, he'd say, thank you, Ribbon Shalom. It was part of his life, talking to the Ribbon Shalom. My father would often tell me, when I open the refrigerator door and I see so much food, I make a bracha she'asali kol tzarki. It's not a given that there's food in the fridge. My father would say, it's snowing outside and we have heat. I have to thank the Ribbon Shalom. When we were children, my father would say, you don't have to daven. You have to start your day thanking the Ribbon Shalom. I'm not going to tell you how long to daven. I will tell you that you have to say thank you before you start your day. Even now, as my father was battling the illness and found himself very weak and unable to do most of his life, he kept saying, God granted me 75 beautiful years. That's such a nice way to look at life. When there were years that my father fought very hard for the parnasa, there were years that he didn't change shoes or a car. There were years with other difficulties. There were years facing medical challenges. My father suffered from scoliosis his whole life. My father had an infection that caused him his systems to collapse. There were a lot of difficult times through those years, but my father looked at life and said, Hashem gave me a good life. My father was an idealist. It was obvious to him when I was a teenager and a friend of mine lost all parents and had nowhere to live that he should move in by us. It was obvious that if his sister-in-law fell ill, so then his wife should fly to California and take care of the children, even if it meant for years that he lived as a bachelor. That was obvious to him. So he had to take care of himself, so he had to take care of meals, so he had to take care of his Shabbosim, because he was an idealist. And I once said to him, you're an idealist? And he looked at me and said, nah. When did he agree to be a sandik? When a missionary, a former coworker, decided he's going to try to convert him. And then he said, okay, so then I'm going to express my belief in our covenant. And that's when he became a sandik. Until then, he didn't agree. When did he start funding the alon in the name of the Beit HaMikdash? When he saw that people were speaking against our rights to the Temple Mount, that's when he said, I have to do my part to reinstate, to strengthen our connection to Har HaBayit. When my father saw that Kriyat Torah was struggling in the minyan he was in, so he made sure the minyan had the right Baal Koreh. I shouldn't say right. The minyan had the Baal Koreh they needed. That's also not right. When the shul needed assistance in their security, so my father made sure that that also moved forward. My father told me many times that he doesn't kiss us in shul. He said, I think the halacha didn't want it because there are people around you who don't have children. I said, that's not what it says in the Ramah. And my father said, I think that's what the halacha wanted. My father didn't look fondly upon people who walked in the street holding hands, couples holding hands. He said, what does that do to other people? Maybe someone else's marriage is not holding there. Why should that public display of affection be there when you don't know how you're affecting other people? I once said to my father, half jokingly, I said, you fly a lot, why don't you order glatt? They serve the glatt food first. You'll get your meals first. And my father said, I wouldn't be able to eat when the people around me are hungry. Wow. I once argued with him. I said, you know, in a minute or two they'll have food. And he said, people sometimes come to the plane hungry. I wouldn't be able to eat. In his electric bill, he made sure to pay so that other people would have heating. And this was something he was happy with. I have to cut short, even though there's a lot more to say. But people took of their time and came out here at night, and my father valued people's time. So I want to conclude with one concept that my father would repeat. My father said the word malach in Hebrew is not only an angel. The word malach is also a messenger, a human being. My father said that in his life he had many malachim. He had many people who came and were blessings in his life, Jews and non-Jews alike. My father would teach us, I felt, that part of our role in life is to be that malach, that messenger of good, that angel in other people's life. And I think that he certainly was a malach, he certainly was a messenger for a lot of good in people's life. I can attest first and foremost about myself, but I think that many people can attest aside from me. Tomorrow morning the sun will rise again, but there's going to be less light in the world. Person who brought a lot of light to other people with his sense of humor, with his good word, even to strangers, with a lot of optimism, with a lot of care for other people, with a good eye, with tzniut, exceptional tzniut, with a love of God's creation. A person who had a good name has gone to this world. יהי זכרו ברוך, בילה המוות לנצח, ומחה אדוני אלוהים דמעה מעל כל פנים. In the name of the congregation, in the name of our families, I ask our Father Mechila, and I ask the tzibur to join me in saying, Machul lecha, Machul lecha, Machul lecha. I'll say it again and you can say it with me. Machul lecha, Machul lecha, Machul lecha. Lech legoralcha. Amen.
Good evening, everybody. We know the hour is late, and we appreciate your giving us the ability to honor my father in spite of the hour. As my brother mentioned, the reason we're doing it this late is to have had the opportunity for all the family to fly in from Israel and to also have the opportunity to be able to do Kfura before Shkia tomorrow. And so we thank you for providing us that opportunity to honor our father. My father used to tell us often that, I am not what you aspire to be. I am the rung from which you begin. And one of the things that's most fascinating as being the final speaker is that you see the consistency where all my brothers got to use the content and the sayings that I was going to quote, which I think speaks to my father's accomplishment as a parent in terms of conveying the message. And my father would often tell us, you don't have to agree with me, but ad mea v'esrim, I want you to know what I stood for. And I think that listening today to each of my brothers, we definitely feel that we were given the gift of my father being very clear, whether we liked it or not, for what he stood for. My father would often say, the Torah does not command you that you have to love your parents. You have to honor, you have to respect, but you do not have to love. I hope you love me, but most importantly, you have to respect. We all have a deep reverence, honor, and love of you, Abba. And that was earned by setting a very high bar. As we left the hospital today, there was a song that was going through my mind. I was leaving with my brother and my mother, And the song that was going through my mind was a song that we sang just a few weeks ago in Shul, B'tzeiti mimitzrayim and B'tzeiti miYerushalayim, where we compare the joy and the triumphant feeling when we left Mitzrayim to sadness in the morning when we left Yerushalayim. My wife would often say that, Baruch Hashem, during the hospitalizations that we had where our kids were born, she always felt this amazing feeling when you left the hospital, how you would come in as two and you would leave as three. That was my B'tzeiti mimitzrayim. And yet today, I came in with my mother as three, and we left as two. And so our goal today is V'achai yitein libo, to be able to impart with each of you and for us a little bit of who my father was, what he meant to us, and what he meant to others. Over the last few weeks, I had the zchut, the tremendous privilege that God granted me, where I was between jobs and was actually able to take the time to be with my father, and with the support of my wife, was able to take the time to be there through many of the doctor visits. And at one point, I turned to my father, and I asked my father, Abba, ech ata margish? How do you feel? It's a funny question to ask somebody who's suffering from cancer. And this is what my father answered me. And I think in many ways, it is a tamtzit. It summarizes what my brothers have spoken about tonight. My father said to me, Halo, ani ish tochen, v'ani margish rek mitochen. I am a man of tochen. I'm a man of content. I'm a man of substance. And with the way I feel right now, I feel empty of substance. A man who's suffering, a man who's undergoing chemo, a man who's losing his dignity, when you ask, what do you feel about? My father said, I feel I'm lacking tochen. And in many ways, that is exactly what my father was, to me at least, as somebody who was an ish tochen, that everything that my father did, as we heard from my brothers, was permeated with this tochen, with this content, with this sense of purpose, with the deep sense of how Torah imbues it. My brothers have shared many examples, and so I will eliminate them from my speech, hopefully getting us out of here before midnight. But I want to share one example with factory, with the business, and then some humor, because my father did have a very witty sense of humor that was also imbued with this tochen. My brother Tzvi spoke about this idea of Asher bara Elokim lasot, that God created the world for us to be creative. And in being a cheese person, being a third-generation manufacturer, my father felt in it not just a job, not just a business, but also a partnership with God, a partnership with the Yitzirah, of lasot, of a process of creation. My father had many ups and downs in business. It's one of the things that's interesting, that when you look at a business person, you think it's always glorious. I remember I was once at a wedding for a friend of mine, spoke to my brother about something that happened in the business, and literally in the middle of the wedding left. I just could not participate anymore and booked a flight back. It was something that we'd have to recover from. My brother mentioned there were years that my father did not change shoes because there wasn't the money for it. But yet my father was always an ish emunah, a person who believed that Hashem natan v'Hashem nakach. Over the last few years, I had the opportunity to become a manager myself, to have other people reporting to me. And as somebody who led other people, I looked to my father to learn how to lead. And the one lesson that my father would always tell me over and over and over again is to remember that when you are somebody else's boss, that after God, you are the most powerful person in that person's life. You have the ability to build, and you have the ability to crush. And with that, my father, every day when he showed up at work and had 70-plus people reporting to him, appreciated that not only were there 70-plus people, but there were spouses, children, hundreds of people for whom my father had the ability to positively influence in life. And my father took that responsibility and appreciated that because he understood the power that he had, something that very often managers do not understand. I'd like to share with you some of my father's humor, because my father did have a sense of humor. As my brother Hillel mentioned, we were sitting with the doctors and speaking about the type of things that you speak about how you're going to make final decisions in the hospital. And to quote my brother Hillel, my father looked at us and said, you know, when it comes time for the funeral, everybody in the room will be crying except one person, and that will be me. And that broke the sense in the room and added some levity. So with that in mind, I'll share with you some of my father's humor, and then we'll get to complete. My father would say, how do we know that Hashem is a Sfaradi, or at least spoke like a Sfaradi, rather than an Ashkenazi? Because Hashem would tell Moshe Rabbeinu, Lech ata el Paro. How was Moshe Rabbeinu supposed to know if Lech ata meant you or now, unless Hashem pronounced the ayin like a Sfaradi? My father would say, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that in the Aseret Dibrot, when Hashem commands us, lo tignov, we have a challenge that some people read it with a vav instead of an aleph, where the lo tignov means, to him you should steal. The lo means to him. There's a wonderful story from my brother Tzvi when my father was working with my father in Chicago, in New Jersey, and somebody called in with a shidduch. And somebody asked, they said, we have a wonderful shidduch for your son. It was a shatchan. And they said, but the girl has one condition. Is your son willing to learn in kollel? Father said, I don't think that's his direction. So they corrected and they said, no, we only want him to spend 1 year in kollel. Is he willing to do 1 year in kollel? To which my father immediately shot back without missing a heartbeat and said, tell them, sure, he can do 1 year in kollel. But first, she must do shisha chodashim b'shemen hamor v'shisha chodashim b'absamim. Quoting from the Megillah, she has to spend her 6th year of 6 months of preparation the way they did for Achashverosh. There's a wonderful story where my brother Tzvi was in 5th grade and came back from a recess, and all the kids were back on time, but 1 or 2 kids were late. And the teacher felt that because of achdus, everybody should be participating in the punishment and should have an assignment to write 100 times, I will not come back late from recess. Tzvi came home, said to my father, this isn't fair. We didn't do anything wrong. What kind of nonsense is this, that because of achdus, we have to write 100 times? So my father felt, on the one hand, the balance of chinuch, you have to respect the teacher. Teacher gives you an assignment, you have to do it. On the other hand, the boy has a legitimate complaint. What are you going to say? So they're on Parshas Kisisa. So the next day, my brother almost got thrown out of school. Because when it was time to hand in the assignment, the teacher collected the papers, took my brother's paper, and noticed it looked very different. He looked closely, and what he saw was that my brother wrote 100 times, Ha'ish echad yechta, aval kol ha'edah tiksof. Will one person do something wrong and you'll get angry at anybody? And in doing so is basically sending a message to the teacher to say, excuse me, what chutzpah do you have to punish us? But yet honoring the teacher's request of doing this 100 times. My brothers have spoken about the inspiration my father has given to people during life's challenges, so I will not cover that again. But I will say that I feel that the reason that my father was such a man of tochen, and in many ways the reason that I feel that my father was our Rebbe, was because my father internalized the Torah. He was very much toho kibaro. He was very much what you see is what you get, but internalized the feelings of Torah. It is something that made it, I think, for all of us quite challenging to find our own ways. People have Rebbeim, people have people they look up to. But for all of us, our father was not just our father. He was also our Rebbe. He was the Moreh Halacha. And when we say, Shema b'ni musar avicha v'titosh Torah imecha, we very much feel that that epitomizes the home that my parents created, where it was musar avicha and Torah imecha. The Torah says about Moshe that sometimes we can summarize a person with one word. Moshe started his life as an Ish Mitzri and ended his life as an Ish Elokim. One word, an Ish Elokim, epitomizes the accomplishments of Moshe. Noach started his life as an Ish Tzaddik, ended up as an Ish Adama. I feel that my father, in a statement to us of an Ish Tochen, really gave us the key to understand who he was. He was, indeed, a man of Tochen. I'm going to conclude by talking about two gifts that my father gave us, and I know, or that God gave us, and I know the time is late, but there's also always a feeling of hakarat tov. It is difficult to say that death can be a gift, but sometimes death can indeed be a gift, depending on how it is given. When we think about the final gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe Rabbeinu, there were many, many gifts. But we find that there's one thing that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted, perhaps even more than to go into Eretz Yisrael. And that is that Moshe saw the mitah of Aaron, the way in which Aaron died, and he was mitaveh for that mitah. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe that you're going to die kasher met Aaron achicha, a peaceful death. My father, unfortunately, had a very ugly cancer, a cancer that could have taken many, many paths, could have led to liver failure, could have led to many, many horrible ways to die. And unfortunately, by having a doctor in the family and being able to be in those meetings, we had a very good appreciation of what that could be. And one of the lessons that my father taught us is that my father did not want to be in those meetings, because my father told us, Chazal say, Yibor pachad shovro. A brave person gets broken by fear. And so my father said, I don't want to have fear. I want to have the strength to fight. I want to have the strength to do what we need to do. So you, Hillel, Itamar, Ima, meet with the doctors and don't tell me what they say. It was an incredible way to go into battle as a gibor, as the gibor that my father was. And so, as much as we are in mourning and feel at a loss for our father, we also feel tremendously blessed that my father passed without pain and without needing to undergo the horrible ways in which this cancer could have ended. The second and final bracha that we have, I think, is an incredible bracha when we think of our own parents. You know, our parents get to know us as children. Our parents get to know us who we are as kids. They know our personalities. But how often do our parents really get to know who we are as adults? Sure, they get to know what we're like as adults, our personalities, our families. But how often do our parents get to understand our profession, get to know who we've become and who we've invested ourselves to be? I feel that the last few months have been a privilege and a present to all of us, that across the board, with each and every single one of my brothers and myself, my father and my mother, had the opportunity to see the fruits of their labors, to appreciate and to understand the children that they brought up. Tzvi, my oldest brother, Ata Yoducha Achecha. Abba always looked to you as the leader of the family. Abba saw you as the next generation of the business, and we continue to look to you as Ata Yoducha Achecha. Many of the years I've spoken to Abba about you being in the position to lead, and Abba felt that you were not only ready, but possessed the spirit and the ability to lead. It was tremendous nachat to hear from Abba the way Abba felt about you and as you grew and developed over the years. To my brother Hillel, Dr. Hillel, we say every day in davening, Somech noflim ve'ofeh cholim. And my father would say, it's not enough to be ofeh cholim. It's not enough to heal the sick. You also have to be somech noflim. You also have to give support. I have to tell you that I've learned a lot about medicine. I've learned about doctors and perhaps why Chazal say tov shel bofim legehenom. My father did not appreciate when I would say that. But I did appreciate my brother being a doctor and the care that he gave my father and seeing him be somech noflim and being able to support my father. And thank you, Hillel, and I'm so happy Abba got to see what an amazing doctor you are. To my brother Netanel, you are a person who knows how to muster resources, how to get energy behind things, how to make things happen, and how to get people together. That is your form of leadership. And the form of leadership that you had throughout this is my brother Netanel, who called us together and said, guys, Abba's sick, we need to do something about this. Let's make decisions. Thank you for your leadership. And to my brother Tzuriel, who's watching over video, you know, my father had a very interesting relationship with his father. German parents have a very hard time saying, I love you. And so the way in which my grandfather would say to my father, I love you, is to quote the pasuk, "V'nafsho keshuro benafsho," that their souls are tied together. To Tzuri, I believe that you are the next generation. Just as Abba with his father was v'nafsho keshura benafsho, so too you and Abba are v'nafsho keshura benafsho. Months before anything showed up on the scans, months before anything was diagnosed, so we realized that something was wrong and was ringing the alarms and saying, go get things out. He has a visceral understanding and a almost telepathic relationship with my father. And Ima, there's a pasuk that was going through my mind throughout this time. My father's name was Yaakov Elchanan, and there were many pasukim where Hashem tells Yaakov, Kilo azavtich, I believe, ki im aseh et asher dibarti lach. Sorry, I couldn't look it up in the Chumash as an onen. Over this time period with my father, I kept thinking to myself about that pasuk, about the responsibility of a child to stay with their father. Lo azavtich ki im asher asiti asher dibarti lach. To be there at their side till the very end. But really, Ima, that pasuk is about you, about the way in which you stood by Abba, literally, until the very end. I think I speak to my father. My father always had hakarat tov. And so our hakarat tov is first and foremost to each and every single one of you. It is 11:15 at night, the clock says. And so we're going to conclude, but I want to thank you for giving us, the Yatumim, the ability to be able to be maspid my father properly. And I want to thank the women in the family, starting with Ima and the wives, for the support that you've had over this time. One of the ways that my father would often give encouragement to people, and one of the lessons that he would teach us, and with this I conclude, is that my father would say that it doesn't matter how old we are when we lose a parent. We could be 5 or we could be 50. The relationship of a child and a parent is that of a child and a parent. And as a result, when you lose a parent, you are always a yatom, regardless of how old you are. Many people had lost their parents when they were older, felt that emptiness, and didn't have a way to put words to it. And my father was able to word the words to it, to say, yes, what you're feeling is you could be 50 years old, but you are still an orphan. I conclude by looking at us today and say, Yetumi Mayinu, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, hold this. Kelemul. We have some. Huh?
With an olive instead of with a kuf.
Ale. Okay, the people to stand up. Kelemul rachamim, shoichein b'meroimim. Hamtzei menukunu choinu al kamfei hashechinu. B'malois kedoshim u'toirim kezoyhar hurukiya masirim. Oy, yes, yar Rav Yaakov Elchanan ben Moshe Yehuda shehulach le'lumoi. What is the next? Babur she'adachnu noirim tzeduka baras kuras neshmusoi beganeidim tehem menechuvusoi luchem bal urachim yasrei b'seisek nufav b'tzroi rechaim lo elomim tzroi rechaim lo elomim b'tzroi rechaim lo elomim es neshmusam Adonai hunachalusom, v'na yunuach b'shol mamash kuvoi, v'nohoi marumein.
Please be seated.
This concludes the funeral service here at the chapel. The interment will be tomorrow afternoon, approximately 3:30 at South Florida Jewish Cemetery, That information is on the website that you joined on the Zoom or on the service folder that you received when you arrived. The family will update a Shiva information tomorrow, and we'll update our website. For those, I would say approximately in the afternoon, we'll have all that information, and for those that want to know the Shiva times, they can check it on the website. Please rise as we escort the chapel from the casket from the chapel. Once we've left the chapel, we ask everybody to please remain standing until the family leaves, then everybody can go back to their vehicles.